Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at puremtgo.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com. Hey everybody, Spencer here. This is Arena Mythicast. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm excited to talk about Standard today. As you'll notice, there's no guest. I am excited because I'm going to try something new today. I have wanted to kind of make Arena Mythicast my place to just talk about Magic the Gathering in a lot of ways, interview people about getting Mythic and different things like that. And one of the episodes that I want to be able to do is kind of just diving into the format where I talk about kind of how I'm studying a format, where I'm going to get resources and things like that. And one of my favorite resources is actually a tweet that comes out, I feel like it's weekly, by Adam Yeoman 5 Hernandez on Twitter. And he talks about kind of what his opinions are on the decks to beat, the decks people would play but shouldn't, decks people should respect but won't, and what he would play. And while I don't always agree with Adam's hot takes, I do think that he puts a lot of effort into this. He has an article that comes out with it, and I want to talk about kind of what was in his tweet this week and what I am doing to kind of look at the metagame, even whether it's against his tweet or when I look at deck lists and things like that, and the shares of the metagame, and kind of just break down Standard as far as like what's doing well, what's not doing well, where am I getting my information, how am I looking for information, and things like that, and just offer that to you so that you can make a judgment against what my thoughts are, and then do a little bit of work yourself to end up in a place that you might want to be for whatever your weekend events are, or for whatever your ladder grinding is. So with that being said, let's take a look at the kind of the world of Magic right now. So here's Adam's tweet that I mentioned. I just want to make sure that I shared it. This week he has decks to beat: Jeskai Luka and Jeskai Cycling, decks people will play but shouldn't, Bant Ramp, Rakdos Sacrifice, Sultai Ramp, and Temur Reclamation. Decks people should respect but won't, Mono Black Aggro, and what he would play is 4-color Luka. So I want to talk about MTG Goldfish really quick. So, as we all know, MTG Goldfish is a great resource to get decks. If you go to there, mtgo.com, Arena Deck Lists Twitter thread, our Twitter thread where we retweet decks of people getting Mythic as well. There's tons of places for you to get information, and the places that I usually get them are the places that I just mentioned. But one of the really cool things that I like to do is just kind of look at the meta percentages, and one of the things that's recently changed is we actually get the decks that aren't winning on MTG Goldfish because of the qualifiers. And that has changed my opinion on MTGO information as far as these percentages go. And we'll talk about that as we look at some of the decks. The first thing that I want to do is talk about the two decks that Adam, for example, had in decks to beat, because they're also two of the decks that I believe are decks to beat. If we just look at Yorion Luka to start with, we see a 5-win, a 3-win, and a 1-win, and we don't see much else here. However, we see a ton of people playing this deck. And, there are a lot of reasons for that, one of them being that the deck is overall really powerful. If you actually go to the article that Adam Hernandez has listed, you actually can see the Standard winners metagame. This is from 5.2 to 5.3, so this is as of a couple of days ago. So this is actually before we see these lists right here. So if we look, for example, on the Luka decks, these results are from the 5th. That doesn't mean just because there's only one 5-win that this deck is bad. Look at just how many people are playing this deck, and also look at the winners metagame, and that's important info to gather. One of the things that's really cool about this deck, though, is just its ability to play 4 of a lot of the really powerful cards. We got 4 Shark Typhoon, we got 4 Elspeth Conquerors deck, we got 4 Fires that I mentioned, we got 4 Birth of Meletus, 4 Omen of the Sea, to really make Yorion a little bit better. And honestly, I mean, you got Omen of the Forge of the sideboard that gets to interact with your Teferi Time River, where you can bounce it and replay it, just like you were doing with Oath of Kaya in Standard. This deck has a lot of small synergies while also being really powerful. And the other thing that I'll notice is like Shark Typhoon does a really good job of letting you snowball just like Fires of Invention does. Uh, and I really like that. This deck offers a lot. Luca, also a card that a lot of people weren't sure on. I'd like to kind of talk about this card really quick as we see this card really making a bigger and bigger impact in Standard. So, Luca is the new Planeswalker from Ikoria. Plus one exile the top three cards of your library. Creature cards exile this way. Again, you can cast this card as long as you control Luca. -2, exile target creature you control, then reveal cards from the top of your library until a card with a converted mana cost, put that card on the battlefield. Um, so, interesting to note here. You reveal a creature card with higher converted mana cost, put the card on the battlefield. +1, exile the top three cards, you can play a creature card. -7, each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So, first of all, if we're just looking at that deck list, so let's go back in and look at the this deck. What we actually see is there's only one creature. It's Agent of Treachery. So, how is Luca getting me Agent of Treacheries? Well, Birth of Meletus makes a creature. Shark Typhoon makes a creature. Elspeth Conquers Death can get. Well, actually, it cannot get back Agent of Treachery, so that doesn't work. But Shark Typhoon makes creatures. Omen of the Sun makes creatures. Birth of Meletus makes creatures. And then what you're doing is you're sacrificing those creatures to get Agent of Treacheries. And then you're playing your on to Agent of Treachery again. It's really powerful. And also, if we're being a little bit honest, not how I was expecting this card to be used. This card and this deck are different. They're attacking on a different angle. They're getting value from their cards in all kinds of ways to really prolong the game to get to the point where you're going to take it over that way. And that's new. That's different. One of the decks that I don't think was mentioned in Adam's tweet, if I'm not mistaken, was just regular Jeskai Fires. And 2 weeks ago, if you would asked anyone about what deck was the top deck, Crew of Fires would have been in that conversation. And it's completely fallen off. People like Yeoman's list of decks to be prepared for. And as somebody that was an advocate of this deck and thought this was just the best deck in a lot of ways, I kind of agree. I mean, you see people just doing such powerful things. And honestly, I think that the Fires decks had problems with band trap. I think they had problems with cycling. I think there was a lot of things going on that really prevent this deck from being as successful as it could. And like Yeoman, I actually agree with Team of Reclamation falling off. I was a big Team of Rec player at the beginning of the format. I thought it was one of the best decks early on. I know that Dylan Hand did well with the deck. We saw Seth Manfield take second at a Grand Prix with the deck. I was a huge fan of this deck, huge fan of Shark Typhoon in the deck, and the deck has just kind of gotten worse and worse as things gone by. If we look at this list that did well at the qualifier on May 5th, though, this list is great. Like, if you're looking for a good Team of Reclamation list, this might just be it. Just play this 75. You have a great deck. You've got Nightpack Ambusher on the sideboard. You've got 4 total Flame Sweeps. You've got Scorching Dragonfire for things. You've got, you get to play Ether Gust. Like, you get to play great cards. You have counter spells in the main deck. Like, the deck is able to adapt. It's a control deck. I just don't know if it's where I want to be right now. That doesn't mean this deck is bad. That doesn't mean that this deck isn't worth playing, isn't worth innovating on, isn't worth going and trying to improve. It's just not where I would be right now. We've already talked about the Jeskai Cycling deck a little bit. This deck is really interesting in the fact that it plays so many cyclers. I believe that there is 22 non-cyclers in the 60 main deck, and every single of the other 38 cards has cycling. The way that wins is you get a Flourishing Phlox in play, or maybe a Stinger in play, or you slow the game down until you can, get to the point where you can cast Zenith Flare. Zenith Flare is in my opinion, kind of the big bad guy of Standard. I think Zenith Flare is not the funnest, but you kind of have this aggro combo deck-esque thing that puts pressure in a different way on the format. And you know, I think that a lot of people don't like this format because of the companions. But I don't know that this deck would be that much worse if like Luris just didn't exist. Like it just so happens that it can give up a sideboard spot to play Luris so that it can replay these creatures, but it doesn't have to. And that's really powerful and kind of sweet. And if you like drawing cards, this is a great deck. It's one of the decks. It's definitely a deck you need to be prepared for. If you're not ready to beat Zenith Flare, you're probably going to have a bad time in this format. I mean, this deck costs $29 online. It costs $18.85 in paper, or 88.85 in paper on Gold, according to Goldfish. Like, it's a really inexpensive deck that's really strong, and it puts pressure on the format in a way that I think is healthy. One of the things to note is you'll see that it's called four color cycling. You actually can't cast the memory leak. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Here we see this list that is playing four Sacred Foundry, nine plains, and five mountains. So you really don't have to worry about that too much. One thing that is interesting to know though is that you get to play a deck that has so few lands in it, and eventually, you're able to kind of just go off. I've seen people go off with just a Stinger in play. I've seen people go off with just a Rescuer in play and just get just enough stuff to make those Zenith Flares end the game quickly. This is definitely a deck that I think that you should both be prepared for, and if you want to play it and you enjoy this style of deck, go for it. I think this deck is great. The deck that I think I disagree with Yeoman's tweet on a little bit is Bant Ramp. This is a deck that I've had a pretty good win percentage with. I know some other people are still pretty high on this deck. If we look, it has pretty decent results. It's got a 4 and a 5 and a 4 in the last day or so, just like something like the Urion deck. Overall, I think this deck is great. I mean, you get Tolsimir out of the sideboard. You definitely have the counterspells you need in Dovin's Veto and things like that. And also, you just get to play super powerful cards like Urion and things like that. It's not like you're short on Agent of Treacheries. Tamio is a really powerful card. You still get counterspells for things like Zenith Flare. It's possible that this deck Zenith Flare matchup is not as good as I think it could be, and that you need to devote more things to that. But I think that you could be willing to devote and change this deck and adapt pretty well. Almost more so than the Jeskai Fires deck. One of the problems with something like Jeskai Fires is you might just have to play something like, or not Jeskai Fires, uh, Team of Reclamation. I'm sorry. You might just have to play something along the lines of the Brazen Borrowers just to make sure that you can interact with the Fox once it gets big enough. Whereas with the Bant Ramp decks, you can play things like Shadow the Sky. You can play things. I mean, you can play Glass Casket. Like you can just get really efficient in both your removal and things like that to make things work for you. The other deck that we should probably talk about, in my opinion, is the Obosh Sacrifice deck. This deck seems quite good to me and a little bit underrepresented. Uh, I think that both Mono Black and Obosh are playing Banner right now, and for those who know, that's a 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you pick a color. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+0, and you can tap it for mana. I have been surprised by having my not being able to kill my opponent's lords has been really annoying. But Obosh, this 5 mana card, making it so that everything just deals a ton of damage. The deck is a pretty good aggro deck. It's still playing Claim the Firstborn and Witch's Oven. The thing that you lose out on is just kind of some mediocre cards, and you get access to Mayhem Devil over the Mono Black deck. I like this deck better than Mono Black. I could be wrong, but it still does have good results. I mean, just in the last couple of days, we've got multiple 5 wins, and then in the later tournaments, it kind of fell off. But this deck seems really strong to me, and if you're looking for an aggressive deck that's not cycling, I think this is where I would tend to lean. Um, that's just my opinion. I think it's better than the Luris version, uh, you know, but I don't know. I could be wrong on that. The Luris version could be great. I mean, you certainly get a lot from Luris in these style of decks. The problem is that you do lose out on the card that we just talked about. But I think that both, when you combine them, their win percentage is quite powerful, and it's something that you can definitely still win with. So outside of that, I want to talk about go back to Adam's tweet really quick. Um, like I said, I do know that I respect Adam, and I also respect the work that he puts in. And so when Adam talks about a deck and what he would play, I like to look at it. In his article, which I still and highly recommend that you check out, he actually talks about this 4 color deck, and I had not seen the standard challengers results from the first. I didn't get a chance to look at them over the weekend. I kind of had an interesting weekend. But if we look at this deck, it's a Calyx uh, Fires deck where it's playing all of these enchantments. It's got Birth of Meletis, Shark Typhoon, Omen of the Sun, Omen of the Sea, Omen of the Hunt, Fires, Elspeth Conquers Death. Uh, and it's still got kind of that Luca game going on. I really think this deck is sweet. In the sideboard, you can find Cinder Vines, just kind of a ton of really awesome stuff, while also just still being this really value-driven Urion deck. And you know, this to me is more my speed than the Jeskai version. So I might try this out and play this more. That doesn't mean that you're wrong for playing the Uriel Luca deck. You need to be prepared for it. This deck is strong. It's probably considered the best deck right now. That doesn't mean that playing something slightly different is wrong. A lot of my friends advocate just play the best deck, just play the best deck. But if you're going to perform better with something else and you think that it gives you an edge in certain areas, there's nothing wrong with playing this Calyx deck. I personally think this deck looks more powerful and better. The mana looks really strong. I was playing a 5-color Fires deck on String the other day. You get 4 of each of the Tri-lands. You get Fable Passage, which is basically 4 colors anyway. I mean, actually, it might not be in this one. It looks like it's playing Forest. No, it is. It's playing all 4 of them. So you got a quad land in this deck. This deck seems really powerful to me. It's definitely one that I would check out. Also, it's by Pika Power, which is Jeff Pika, for those who don't know. Great Magic player, really awesome dude. He's actually been on this show before. Highly recommend checking him out on Twitter. I mean, there's just so many powerful things in this standard format, and people really like to say, that the standard format is not fun, that they don't enjoy it, that, companions are ruining Magic, and standard is an example of how. I don't know that companions are ruining standard. Obviously, they are powerful. Obviously, they are a huge part of this metagame. But that doesn't mean that the format's bad. I mean, if you just look at the number of decks getting wins and being a part of this standard format, I didn't even mention the blue-white control, the Azorius control Euron decks that were doing well on the Mythic ladder for a little while. You've got that creature deck that he mutates like crazy. There's a ton of really powerful things in this format, and the format is very different than it was before this set came out. But I don't know that means the format's bad. It's just different, and it's evolving. I mean, like I said, 2 weeks ago we would have been talking about Jeskai Fires, and today we're talking about, Jeskai Fires, a very completely different deck. There's tons of innovation going on. There are very interesting cards, and I highly recommend you check out Standard. Like I said, Jeskai Cycling, I mean, this deck costs very little and is something you can really check out. We didn't even talk about the Winota decks on this podcast. Something else that you might need to be prepared for if you want. One thing you need to be prepared for that's very clear from this podcast, by the way, is Agent of Treachery. Holy crap, that card is everywhere, and just kind of understanding that and understanding where the format's at is really, I think, rewarding in this format. You get rewarded for doing your research, understanding how people are attacking different decks and where things sit. The reason that, by the way, for those who might be big Winota fans, that I didn't include it, is it really hasn't had great results over the last couple of days. That doesn't mean the deck's not good. It's just something that I didn't think it needed to be talked about. I know that my podcast co-host, previous podcast co-host, Matthew King, thinks the world of the deck. He thinks it's great. So, but overall, that's kind of where this format is at for me. So, if you would ask me what would I play, I might try out the deck that Yeoman's recommending, or I might end up on something closer to, I don't know, Bant Ramp. Like, I think that both these decks seem really powerful. Obviously, I'm a sucker for a good ramp spell. Both of these decks happen to play Growth Spiral. I love Growth Spiral. And, also being the Growth Spiral deck in the world of Fires of Invention just seems good. So, That's where I'm at. That's where I would be in this standard format. Leave a comment. Let me know if you have any questions. Is there a deck I didn't talk about that you think might be a little bit underrepresented in this metagame that you think is really powerful? Is there any questions that you have about it in the decks that I can answer? What did you think of this style of podcast? Was it helpful for you? Did I dive into enough information? Would you rather that I just stick to those one deck episodes where I dive deep on a deck that I've been playing? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. If you're listening at home, don't forget to leave a review on iTunes. It really helps out the show. Hit that like and sub button on YouTube, and don't forget to check out our sponsor at puremtgo.com. Thank you so much to Yeoman for letting me use his tweet to kind of template this podcast today. Huge shout out to him. Huge shout out to Jeff, by the way, for that win. And thank you everybody so much for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week with another episode of Arena Mythicast.